The station world of Vethery Prime floated in the cold darkness between stars, a massive ring of metal and light that served as home to the Galactic Coalition Combat Academy. It was here that the finest warriors of 100 species came to train, to fight, and to prove themselves worthy of defending civilization itself. Commander Yeltrix stood at the edge of the training platform, his forearms crossed over his chest as he watched the new cadets file into the orientation hall. His iridescent scales shifted from deep blue to purple as his mood soured, a physical tell that his species could never fully hide. The new class was impressive, he had to admit. There were 6 Kethri cadets, their slender bodies already fitted with the neural-linked armor that made their kind so deadly in combat. Their silver eyes scanned everything, recording, analyzing, learning at speeds that other species could only dream of. Behind them came 2 Broom, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies encased in living chitin that could stop most plasma fire without any additional shielding. They moved slowly but with absolute confidence, knowing that very little in the galaxy could actually hurt them. A pair of Almeri drifted in next, their forms flickering between solid and transparent as they practiced their phase-shifting abilities. They could become partially intangible at will, letting energy weapons pass harmlessly through their bodies. And then, at the very back of the group, came the human. Yeltrix felt his scales flush an irritated orange. He had argued against accepting humans into the Advanced Combat Program, but the Coalition Council had overruled him. They spoke of diplomacy, of inclusion, of giving the younger species a chance to prove themselves. The human was a woman, compact and unremarkable compared to the other cadets. She stood perhaps 170 centimeters tall, with dark hair pulled back tight against her skull and skin the color of desert sand. Her service record listed her as Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez, age 34, from the colony world of New Castile. What made Yeltrix's scales burn brightest was what she carried. While every other cadet bore plasma rifles, energy shields, or the sophisticated weapons of their homeworlds, this human carried a sword. Not a plasma blade, not an energy weapon shaped like a sword, but an actual metal sword. It hung at her hip in a worn leather sheath, the handle wrapped in old cloth that had been replaced many times over many years. "Commander," one of the Kethri cadets said, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones of her species, "is that human carrying primitive weaponry as some form of cultural display?" Yeltrix made a sound that translated roughly as a sigh across most languages. "I believe she is serious, Cadet Soranthy. Humans have only been spacefaring for 200 years, and they cling to their ancient tools like children clutching comfort objects." The other cadets laughed, a chorus of clicks and hums and chittering sounds that filled the hall with mockery. Elena Vasquez did not react. She simply stood at attention, her dark eyes forward, her face completely still. "Cadets," Yeltrix announced, his voice amplified by the translation systems built into the walls. "Welcome to the Coalition Combat Academy. Over the next standard year, you will learn to fight, to survive, and to protect the billions of lives that depend on our forces. You will master plasma deflection, tactical maneuvering, and combat integration with your fellow soldiers." He walked slowly down the line of cadets, examining each one. "The Kethri among you will refine your neural link combat systems. The Broom will learn to use your natural armor in coordination with squad tactics. The Almeri will perfect your phase shifting to avoid enemy fire entirely." He stopped in front of Elena and looked down at her. She was so small compared to him, her body soft and unarmored, her only weapon the ridiculous strip of metal at her side. "And you, human," he said, letting a small amount of contempt enter his voice, "will be assigned to the remedial training group. Perhaps we can find you a proper weapon and teach you the basics of modern combat." "With respect, Commander," Elena said, her voice calm and level, "I already have a proper weapon." Yeltrix laughed, and several cadets joined him. That antique? You cannot be serious. We are training to fight enemies who wield plasma cannons, who command drone swarms, who can melt through starship hulls. What do you expect to do with a piece of sharpened metal? Elena did not answer. She simply placed her hand on the hilt of her sword and stood there, waiting. Report to Remedial Hall 7 at 0600 tomorrow, Yeltrix ordered, turning away from her. Try not to cut yourself on that relic. The cadets filed out toward their quarters, and Elena went with them, walking alone at the back of the group. The Kethri whispered to each other in their rapid-fire language, and even without understanding the words, Elena knew they were talking about her. They called her the primitive in voices they thought she could not hear. She did not mind. She had been called worse. That night, Elena sat in her small quarters and drew her sword from its sheath. The blade gleamed in the artificial light, its edge still sharp after more than 300 years. Her great-grandmother had carried this sword across the oceans of Earth, had passed it to her daughter, who passed it to hers, until it finally came to Elena on the day she joined the Colonial Defense Force. She ran a cloth along the metal, applying oil to keep it clean, to keep it ready. They do not understand, she said to the empty room, but they will. Meanwhile, in his office, Commander Yeltrix pulled up Elena's service file on his display screen. He wanted to know why the Council had bothered sending this primitive creature to his academy. Most of the file was standard. Born on Earth, moved to New Castile Colony at age 12, joined Colonial Defense at 18. But large sections of her record were marked with black redaction bars, hidden from even a commander's access level. Only one note remained visible at the bottom of the file, written in the cold, formal language of Coalition military records. Survivor Incident 47 Cross. Yeltrix did not recognize the designation. He searched the database, but found nothing. Whatever Incident 47 Cross was, it had been classified at the highest levels. He leaned back in his chair, and for reasons he could not explain, his scales prickled with unease. There was something about this human, something hidden behind those dark, calm eyes. He told himself it was nothing. She was just a primitive soldier from a primitive species, clinging to a primitive weapon. She would wash out of the program within a month, and he would never have to think about her again. But as he dimmed the lights and prepared to rest, he could not shake the feeling that he was missing something important. In her quarters, Elena finished caring for her blade and slid it back into its sheath. She lay down on her bunk and closed her eyes, and in her dreams, she danced through fire while the screams of 12,000 voices echoed in the darkness around her. She had survived that fire once before, and she would survive whatever this academy threw at her. The sword had taught her how. 2 weeks passed at the Coalition Combat Academy, and Elena Vasquez became something of a joke among the cadets. They watched her in the dining hall, sitting alone with her ancient sword propped against the table beside her. They whispered about her in the corridors, wondering why the Coalition wasted resources on such a primitive species. The remedial training group was exactly as useless as Elena had expected. The instructors tried to teach her how to hold a plasma rifle, how to activate an energy shield, how to interface with the basic targeting systems that even children on most Coalition worlds learn to use. She completed every exercise they gave her, scoring adequately but never excellently. She did not want to draw attention, not yet. She simply waited and watched and learned how her fellow cadets moved, how they thought, how they fought. On the 15th day of training, Commander Yeltrix summoned all cadets to the combat simulation arena. It was a massive chamber at the heart of the academy, capable of recreating any battlefield environment through hard light projections and gravity manipulation. Today, Yeltrix announced, his forearms spread wide as he addressed the gathered cadets, we will practice the most fundamental skill in modern combat, plasma deflection. The cadets murmured with excitement. This was what they had come here to learn. Plasma bolts travel at approximately 3,000 meters per second, Yeltrix continued. At that speed, no biological creature can react fast enough to dodge. Therefore, you must learn to deflect, to redirect, to use your shields and your abilities to survive. He gestured, and a section of the arena floor rose to form a testing platform. Plasma turrets emerged from the walls, their barrels glowing with contained energy. Each of you will take your turn on the platform. The turrets will fire at increasing speeds and complexity. You will use your species abilities or your issued equipment to survive. One by one, the cadets stepped forward. The Kethri used their neural-linked armor, which predicted incoming fire and automatically positioned energy barriers to intercept each bolt. The brooms simply stood and let the plasma splash against their living chitin, trusting their natural armor to protect them. The Omari phase shifted, becoming partially intangible so that the plasma passed through their bodies without causing harm. Each cadet passed the test with ease. This was basic training for species that had been fighting wars among the stars for thousands of years. Then Yeltrix called Elena's name. The arena fell quiet as the human walked toward the platform. She had refused the plasma rifle, refused the energy shield, refused every piece of modern equipment the Academy had offered her. All she carried was that ridiculous metal sword. "Human," Yeltrix said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "You understand that this exercise requires you to survive plasma fire, yes?" "I understand, Commander." "And you still insist on using that primitive weapon?" "I do." Yeltrix made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Very well. I want the entire Academy to see what happens when stubbornness meets physics. You cannot deflect plasma with steel, human. Even your primitive brain must understand basic thermodynamics." Elena did not respond to the insult. Instead, she made a request. "Commander, I would like the gravity reduced to 0.4 standard." Yeltrix flicked his tail in amusement. "You want to embarrass yourself in conditions more comfortable for your weak species? Granted, set gravity to 0.4. The gravity in the arena shifted, and Elena felt her body grow lighter. This was close to the gravity of New Castile, close to the conditions where she had first learned what her sword could really do. She drew the blade, and 300 years of metal sang softly as it left the sheath. She held it before her in a stance that none of the aliens recognized. Her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, her eyes fixed on the plasma turrets. "Begin," Yeltrix commanded. The first turret fired. Elena moved. She did not try to block the plasma bolt. That would have been suicide, and she knew it. Instead, she twisted her body to the side, using the momentum of her sword swing to pull herself out of the bolt's path. The plasma screamed past her, close enough that she could feel its heat on her skin. The second turret fired, then the third, then all of them at once. Elena danced. There was no other word for what she did. Her body flowed through the storm of plasma like water through the gaps between stones. Each swing of her sword was not an attempt to deflect, but a calculated pivot, a way of shifting her mass and changing her trajectory in the low gravity. She read the turrets like she was reading music, anticipating where each bolt would go before it was fired. Her eyes tracked the glow of charging barrels, the tiny movements of targeting systems, the patterns that repeated in predictable ways. Plasma bolts filled the air around her, a web of killing light that should have been impossible to survive. But Elena found the spaces between the threads, the gaps that existed for only fractions of a second. Her blade guided her through them, each movement flowing into the next in an endless dance. The turrets fired faster. The patterns grew more complex. The gaps between bolts shrank until it seemed like there was no space left at all. And still Elena danced. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. Then two. The turrets reached their maximum rate of fire. filling the platform with more plasma than any cadet had ever faced in this exercise. Elena did not slow down. If anything, she moved faster, her body and blade working as a single unit, finding paths through the chaos that the alien cadets could not even see. Then the turrets fell silent, their test cycle complete. Elena stood in the center of the platform, breathing hard but unharmed. Her sword gleamed in the arena lights, not a single scorch mark on its ancient steel. The simulation logs flickered on the main display, 0 hits recorded. The arena was completely silent. Every cadet, every instructor, every observer stared at the human woman with expressions of pure disbelief. Commander Yeltrix's scales had gone pale, shifting through colors that had no name in any language Elena knew. His forearms hung limp at his sides. "That," he said slowly, "that should not be possible." Elena sheathed her sword with a smooth, practiced motion. "You were right, Commander. I cannot deflect plasma with steel, but I never said I was going to deflect it." She walked off the platform, and the crowd of cadets parted before her like water before a ship's bow. Later that evening, Elena sat alone in the observation deck, watching the stars turn slowly beyond the station's windows. She was not surprised when she heard footsteps approaching. She had noticed a Kethri cadet watching her ever since the demonstration. "May I sit?" Sorinthy asked. Elena nodded, and the silver-eyed alien settled onto the bench beside her. "What you did today," Sorinthy said, "that was not deflection. It was not evasion in any way our tactical systems would recognize. What do your people call it?" Elena considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Dancing," she said finally. "We call it dancing." Sorinthy's neural implants flickered with processing activity. "I do not understand. Dancing is a social activity, a form of entertainment. How can it be combat?" "Among my people," Elena said, "dancing and fighting were never very different. Both require you to predict your partner, to move with the flow of motion, to find harmony in chaos." She drew her sword and held it up so that the starlight ran along its edge. "This blade is 300 years old. It was forged on Earth by a smith who learned his craft from a smith who learned from another, on and on going back thousands of years. Every lesson, every technique, every drop of blood spilled in training is part of this sword now." She looked at Sorinthy with eyes that held depths the Kethri had never seen in a human before. "Your people rely on technology to predict where danger will be. My people learn to predict with nothing but our eyes and our fear. We spent 10,000 years killing each other with sharpened metal, and we remember every lesson." Sorinthy stared at her for a long time, her silver eyes unblinking. "Will you teach me?" she asked finally. Elena smiled, the first real smile she had shown since arriving at the academy. "Yes," she said, "I will." Commander Yeltrix could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the human woman dancing through plasma fire, moving in ways that his tactical training said should be impossible. He sat in the Academy archives, surrounded by holographic displays, searching for any information about Incident 47 Cross. The designation haunted him, a puzzle locked behind security clearances that even a commander could not access. But Yeltrix had served in the Coalition military for 40 years. He had contacts, old friends who owed him favors, officers who could look the other way while he accessed files he was not supposed to see. It took him 3 days to find someone willing to help. An old Broom intelligence officer who had served with him during the Outer Rim campaigns. The Broom owed Yeltrix his life twice over, and that was enough to buy access to the classified records. What Yeltrix found made his scales turn the color of old ice. Incident 47 Cross had occurred 5 years ago on the human colony world of New Castile. The Cross were a hive mind species from the far edge of Coalition space, insectoid creatures that communicated through pheromones and shared a single distributed consciousness. They had been peaceful for centuries, trading rare minerals in exchange for technology. Then, without warning, they had attacked. A cross-war fleet had arrived at New Castile and deployed their deadliest weapon, plasma swarms. Thousands upon thousands of micro-drones, each one carrying a miniature plasma cannon, filling the air with a storm of killing light that no conventional force could survive. The colony had no military ships, no heavy weapons, no energy shields strong enough to stop the swarm. The coalition had classified New Castile as a low-priority settlement, not worth defending with expensive equipment. 12,000 colonists had died in the first hour of the attack. But then something strange had happened. The cross-assault had stopped, not because the coalition sent help, but because the colonists fought back. Yeltrix watched the classified footage with growing disbelief. He saw human colonists armed with farming tools, with kitchen knives, with metal pipes and makeshift clubs. And leading them was a younger Elena Vasquez, her sword flashing in the light of 1,000 plasma bolts. The colonists had discovered something that no other species in the galaxy had thought to try. In New Castile's low gravity, a human body could move fast enough and change direction quickly enough to slip through the gaps in the swarm's fire patterns. It required perfect prediction, absolute body control, and the kind of training that came from a culture built on blade combat. Elena had taught them. In the desperate hours of the attack, she had gathered survivors and shown them how to move, how to read the plasma patterns, how to dance through death itself. They had cut their way through the swarm with nothing but steel and determination. They had reached the cross-command ship and destroyed it, killing the portion of the hive mind that controlled the drones. The swarm had collapsed. The attack had ended, and the coalition had arrived 3 days later to find a shattered colony protected by fewer than 100 survivors. The report noted that Elena Vasquez had been found sitting alone in the ruins of her home, her sword across her knees, her eyes staring at nothing. She had not spoken for 2 weeks afterward. Yeltrix closed the files and sat in the darkness of the archive, his 4 hands trembling. He had mocked her. He had laughed at her weapon. He had called her primitive and weak. And she had killed a hive mind with nothing but a piece of sharpened metal. Meanwhile, on the observation deck, Elena continued her lessons with Sorrenthy. The Kethri was a quick learner, but her body had been trained to rely on technology, to trust her neural implants to do the thinking for her. "You are too slow," Elena said, watching Sorrenthy attempt a basic evasion drill. "You wait for your implants to calculate the correct move, and by then, it is too late. My implants can process combat data faster than any biological brain," Sorrenthy protested. "Faster? Yes, but not soon enough." Elena picked up a training blade and tossed it to the Kethri. "Your technology predicts based on what is happening now. But combat is about predicting what will happen next." She drew her own blade and faced Sorrenthy in a ready stance. "Attack me." Sorrenthy lunged, her neural implants calculating the optimal strike angle. Elena moved before the attack was complete, stepping aside and tapping her blade against the Kethris' ribs. Again. They repeated the drill 12 times, and each time Elena evaded with ease. Finally, Sorrenthy lowered her weapon in frustration. "How?" she demanded. "How do you know what I'm going to do before I do it?" "Because you telegraph your intentions," Elena explained. "Your eyes move before your body. Your muscles tense in specific ways before each attack. Your breathing changes when you commit to a strike. These are signs that technology cannot hide." She sheathed her blade and sat down on a training mat, gesturing for Sorrenthy to join her. "My people call it reading your opponent. We learned it because we had no other choice. For 10,000 years, humans killed each other with swords and spears and knives. We had no shields that could stop a blade, no armor that could guarantee survival. So we learned to not be where the blade was going to land. But why? Soranthy asked. Why did your people spend so long fighting with primitive weapons? Elena smiled sadly. Because we did not know any better. Because we were afraid and angry and desperate. Because sometimes the only way to survive is to become very good at violence. She drew her sword and held it up to the light. This blade was forged on Earth 300 years ago. But the techniques I use are older than that, passed down through generations of warriors who killed and died and learned from their deaths. When my people reached the stars, many of us put away our swords. We thought we had moved beyond such primitive tools. But some of us remembered. Some of us kept the old ways alive, not because we wanted to kill, but because we understood something important. She met Soranthy's silver eyes with her own dark ones. The galaxy is full of species with better technology than ours. The Kethri have neural implants. The Broom have living armor. The Almari can become intangible. But none of you have what we have. And what is that? Fear, Elena said simply. Not the fear that makes you freeze, but the fear that makes you move. The fear that has been refined over thousands of years into something like instinct. We learn to feel death coming before it arrives, and we learn to step out of its way. She stood and offered her hand to Soranthy. That is what I can teach you. Not how to use a sword, but how to feel the rhythm of combat. How to predict without calculating. How to dance with death and survive. Before Soranthy could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and the emergency broadcast system crackled to life. All personnel to combat stations. This is not a drill. We have received a distress signal from Outpost Helix. The Cross have returned. Elena's face went pale, but her hand did not tremble as she gripped her sword. The Cross. The hive mind that had killed 12,000 people on New Castile. The enemy she had thought she had destroyed 5 years ago. Commander Yeltrix's voice came over the intercom, specifically addressing her. Sergeant Major Vasquez, report to the command center immediately. It seems you have experience with this enemy. Elena began walking toward the door, her stride steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Soranthy followed. I am coming with you. This is not a training exercise, Elena warned. The Cross are the most dangerous enemy I have ever faced. Then you will meet someone watching your back. Elena paused and looked at the Kethri. Then, slowly, she nodded. Stay close, she said, and remember everything I taught you. The dance was about to begin again, and this time the stakes were higher than ever. The Coalition transport ship cut through the darkness of space at maximum speed, carrying 40 cadets and a dozen instructors toward the besieged research station known as Outpost Helix. Through the viewports, Elena could see the binary stars that the station orbited, 2 massive suns locked in an eternal dance around each other. The station floated in the gravity null zone between the stars, a point where their gravitational pulls canceled each other out. It was a perfect environment for certain types of research, and apparently, a perfect environment for a cross ambush. Commander Yeltrix stood at the front of the transport's briefing room, his scales pale with tension as he addressed the assembled fighters. The Cross have deployed a new version of their plasma swarm, he said, gesturing to a holographic display that showed the station surrounded by a cloud of tiny lights. Our estimates suggest over 200,000 individual drones, each one carrying a miniature plasma cannon. The station's shields are failing, and the research team is trapped inside. He looked at Elena, and for the first time since she had arrived at the academy, there was no mockery in his eyes. Sergeant Major Vasquez has faced the Cross before. She's the only reason anyone survived New Castile. I am placing her in tactical command of our ground team. A murmur ran through the cadets. Some of them had heard stories about New Castile, whispered rumors about a human colony that had fought off an impossible attack. Now they looked at Elena with new eyes. "The gravity null zone will work to our advantage," Elena said, stepping forward to address the group. "In zero gravity, movement becomes easier. The swarm will have a harder time tracking targets that can change direction instantly. But we cannot dodge forever," a broom cadet rumbled. "Even with your techniques, we will tire before the swarm runs out of ammunition." "We do not need to dodge forever," Elena replied. "We need to reach the station's core, where the Cross Queen node is directing the swarm. Destroy the Queen node, and the drones will shut down." "A decapitation strike," Yeltrix said. "It worked on New Castile. There is no reason it cannot work here." The transport shuddered as it entered the combat zone. Plasma bolts began striking the hull, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "We cannot get any closer. The swarm density is too high." "Then we go on foot," Elena said. "Everyone, seal your suits and prepare for zero-gravity combat." The cadets activated their vacuum suits and checked their weapons. The Kethri synchronized their neural implants. The broom tightened their chitin plates. The Omari practiced their phase shifting. And Elena drew her sword. "Remember what I told you," she said to Sorrenthy as they approached the airlock. "Do not think, feel. Let your body move before your mind catches up." The airlock opened, and they launched themselves into the void. The swarm detected them immediately. Thousands of drones turned and opened fire, filling the space between the transport and the station with deadly light. Elena had never seen so many of them, a living storm of metal and plasma that seemed to go on forever. But she had survived this before, and she would survive it again. She kicked off from the transport's hull and let herself drift toward the station, her sword held ready. The first plasma bolts came screaming toward her, and she twisted her body to slip between them. In zero gravity, there was nothing to hold her back, nothing to slow her movements. She was free in a way that ground-bound fighting could never allow. Around her, the other fighters engaged the swarm. The Kethri used their neural-linked shields, blocking incoming fire with walls of energy. The broom simply absorbed the hits, trusting their armor to hold. The Omari flickered between solid and intangible, letting plasma pass through them harmlessly. But the swarm was overwhelming. There were simply too many drones, too much plasma, too many angles of attack. One by one, the energy shields began to overload. The broom chitins started to crack under sustained fire. Even the Omari could not stay intangible forever. "Fall back," Commander Yeltrix ordered, his voice tight with desperation. "We cannot push through." "No," Elena shouted back. "We keep moving forward. Follow me." She pushed deeper into the swarm, her sword singing as she spun and twisted through the chaos. She was not blocking the plasma. She was reading it, predicting it, feeling the rhythm of the attack, and finding the empty spaces within it. Sorrenthy watched her with wide silver eyes, her neural implants struggling to process what she was seeing. This was not combat as the Kethri understood it. This was something else entirely, something primal and beautiful and terrifying. Then Sorrenthy remembered what Elena had taught her. Do not think, feel. She deactivated her neural combat assistance and let her body move on instinct. It was terrifying at first, fighting without the safety net of technology. But slowly she began to understand. She could feel the plasma bolts coming before they arrived. She could sense the rhythm of the swarm's attack patterns. "I understand," she whispered. "I finally understand." She drew her plasma blade and followed Elena into the storm, moving with a grace she had never achieved before. Other cadets saw them and began to follow, abandoning their failing shields and trusting in movement instead of barriers. The broom cadets could not dance like the others, but they could clear a path. They formed a living wall, absorbing fire while the more agile fighters slipped past them toward the station. Slowly and possibly, they pushed forward through the swarm. The station's airlock was sealed, but Elena did not slow down. She braced herself against a piece of floating debris and kicked off toward the door, her sword raised. At the last moment, she twisted and drove the blade into the airlock's emergency release panel. The door blasted open, and the fighters poured inside. The interior of the station was even worse than the outside. The cross had breached the walls in multiple places, and drones filled every corridor. Research staff lay dead at their posts, killed in the initial assault. The air smelled like burning metal and ozone. "The Queen node will be in the central chamber," Elena said, checking her tactical display. "That is where the Cross always established their command presence." "Then that is where we go," Sorrenthy said, her plasma blade humming with energy. They fought their way through the station, corridor by corridor, chamber by chamber. The swarm was dense inside, with less room to maneuver than in open space. Several cadets fell, struck by plasma they could not dodge in time. Elena felt each loss like a knife in her heart, but she could not stop. She had to keep moving, had to reach the Queen node before more of her people died. Finally, they reached the central chamber. It was a massive zero-gravity space, originally designed for experiments that required large amounts of room. Now it was filled with a pulsing mass of organic tissue and metal, a fusion of cross-biology and drone technology. The Queen node. It was bigger than Elena remembered, upgraded and enhanced since New Castile. Thousands of drones orbited around it in protective patterns, their plasma cannons pointed outward in all directions. "Elena Vasquez," the Queen node spoke, its voice coming from 1,000 drones at once. "We remember you. We remember what you did to us on New Castile. We have been waiting for this moment for 5 years." Elena raised her sword, her heart pounding in her chest. "Then you know what I can do. You know, you cannot stop me." The Queen node made a sound that might have been laughter. "We have studied the recordings from New Castile. We have analyzed your movements, your patterns, your techniques. We have upgraded specifically to counter everything you know." The drones began to move, forming into attack patterns that Elena had never seen before. They were adapting to her, predicting her predictions, learning her dance. "Your primitive blade cannot save you this time," the Queen node said. "We have evolved beyond your ability to survive." Elena looked at the swarm arrayed against her, at the thousands of drones programmed specifically to kill her. Behind her, she heard the exhausted breathing of the surviving cadets, the hum of Sorrenthy's plasma blade, the creak of broomkiten. She smiled. "You learn my dance," she said quietly, "but you do not understand what a sword really is." And she raised her blade and prepared for the final dance of her life. The swarm attacked. Plasma bolts filled the central chamber with killing light, more concentrated and more precisely aimed than anything Elena had ever faced. The Queen node had spent 5 years studying her, analyzing every movement from New Castile, building predictive algorithms designed to end her life. Elena danced, but the swarm was ready. Bolts came from angles she did not expect, closing off escape routes before she could reach them. For the first time since she had picked up a sword, she was too slow. A plasma bolt grazed her shoulder, burning through her vacuum suit and searing the flesh beneath. She gasped in pain but kept moving. Another bolt caught her thigh, and she stumbled in the zero gravity. "You see?" the Queen node said, its voice echoing from every drone. "We have evolved. We have learned. Your dance is predictable now, Elena Vasquez. You are nothing but a pattern, and we have solved you." Elena floated in the center of the chamber, bleeding from her wounds, her sword still gripped tight in her hand. The swarm circled around her like predators around wounded prey. Behind her, Sorrenti and the other cadets tried to push forward, but the drones held them back. They were trapped, forced to watch as the human who had taught them so much was slowly destroyed. "Elena!" Sorrenti screamed. "You have to retreat." But Elena did not retreat. Instead, she looked at her sword, at the blade that had traveled across oceans and continents and the void of space itself. She thought about her great-grandmother, who had carried this sword through wars Elena could barely imagine. She thought about all the warriors who had held blades like this one, generation after generation, reaching back through 10,000 years of human history. "You learn my dance," she said softly, "but you do not understand what a sword really is." The Queen Node paused. "Explain." Elena closed her eyes. "This sword is not a weapon. It is a memory. Every technique I know, every movement, every way of reading an opponent, these things were not invented by me. They were passed down through countless generations of warriors who lived and fought and died so that their knowledge could survive." She opened her eyes, and there was something new in them, something vast and ancient and terrifying. "You studied me. You built your algorithms around my patterns. But I am only one human, trained in one school of sword fighting. You prepared for Elena Vasquez of New Castile." She raised her blade, and her stance changed. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in the angle of her feet, a different way of holding her weight. But the effect on her movement was profound. You did not prepare for the Spanish cavalry, who charged through cannon fire with nothing but steel and courage. She launched herself at the swarm, and her blade moved in patterns the Queen Node had never seen. Wide sweeping arcs that used the sword's momentum to pull her through impossible angles. The predictive algorithms scrambled to adapt, but before they could, Elena changed again. You did not prepare for the Japanese samurai who spent their entire lives mastering the way of the sword. Her movements became precise and economical, each motion flowing into the next with perfect efficiency. She cut through drones that had been positioned to intercept her old patterns, finding gaps that the Queen Node had not predicted. You did not prepare for the medieval knights who trained since childhood to fight in armor. Her stance widened, and suddenly she was using her whole body as a weapon, smashing through drone formations with shoulders and elbows, using her sword to hook and drag and redirect her momentum. The Queen Node's algorithms were collapsing. They had been built to counter one woman with one style. But Elena was channeling 10,000 years of human combat evolution, switching between techniques that had been developed on opposite sides of a planet, refined by cultures that had never met each other. You did not prepare for the Filipino Eskrima masters who learned to fight with anything they could hold in their hands. Her sword became a blur, striking and withdrawing and striking again in rapid combinations. She was not just cutting now, but also thrusting, slashing, using the pommel and the crossguard as additional weapons. You did not prepare for the fencers of Europe who turned sword fighting into a science. Her movements became geometric, precise, each attack aimed at the exact weak points of the drone's armor. She was not wasting energy on unnecessary motion. Every action served a purpose. The swarm was falling apart. Drones that had been positioned perfectly to counter her old style now found themselves in exactly the wrong places. Their plasma bolts missed by centimeters as Elena flowed through techniques that the Queen Node had never seen. "We cannot adapt this quickly." The Queen Node screamed. "This is impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Elena replied, her voice calm despite the blood flowing from her wounds. Humans learned that lesson a long time ago. We learned it every time we picked up a sword and refused to die. She was close to the Queen Node now, close enough to see the fear in its organic components. It tried to pull more drones into defensive positions, but Elena was faster. She changed styles again and again and again, a different technique for every second of combat. Soranthe watched in awe as the human woman became something more than human. She was not just fighting now. She was channeling the spirits of every warrior who had ever held a blade. She was the sum total of 10,000 years of human violence, refined and focused into a single devastating point. "This is what humans are," Soranthe whispered. "This is what we never understood." Elena reached the queen node and raised her sword for the final strike. The ancient blade gleamed in the light of plasma fire and distant stars. "We remember everything," Elena said. "Every lesson, every technique, every drop of blood spilled in training over 10,000 years. That is what you faced on New Castile, and that is what you face now." She drove her sword through the queen node's core. The effect was immediate. The organic tissue convulsed and died. The mental link that controlled the swarm shattered. 200,000 drones went dark at once, their plasma cannons falling silent, their engines failing. Their threat ended in a single instant. Elena floated in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the bodies of dead drones, her sword still embedded in the queen node's remains. She was bleeding badly, her vision starting to fade, but she was alive. She had won. Soranthe reached her first, catching her before she could drift away. "Elena, stay with me." "Did we lose anyone else?" Elena asked, her voice weak. "3 more cadets. But you saved the rest of us. You saved everyone on this station." Elena nodded slowly and let her eyes close. She had done what she came to do. Now she could rest. 3 months later, Commander Yeltrix stood before the Coalition Board in the Great Hall of Vettery Prime. He had requested this audience to present a formal recommendation, and the board had agreed to hear him. "Distinguished members of the board," he began, his scales displaying the deep purple of absolute conviction. "I come before you today to request that Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez be promoted to the rank of instructor and assigned to teach combat techniques at the academy." The board members murmured among themselves. A Cathari representative spoke first. "Commander, we have reviewed the footage from Outpost Helix. While Sergeant Major Vasquez's actions were impressive, we question the wisdom of teaching what are essentially primitive techniques to our advanced cadets." Yeltrix had expected this objection. He was ready for it. "With respect," he said, "I would like to submit a brief report that I believe will change your minds." He activated a holographic display and began to read. "The human species spent 10,000 years learning to kill each other with sharpened metal. They developed entire cultures around the art of violence, schools of combat that were refined over hundreds of generations. They remember every lesson that their ancestors learned, every technique that kept their warriors alive." He looked at each board member in turn. "When we mock their swords, when we call them primitive, we mock the most refined killing knowledge in the known galaxy. The Cross built their algorithms around the best predictive technology in existence, and they still lost because they underestimated the depth of human combat memory." He straightened to his full height. "I recommend that we start learning." The board deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they approved his request unanimously. Elena's first class had 40 students. None of them were human. There were Kethri and Broom and Olmari and a dozen other species, all of them eager to learn what the primitive humans had spent millennia perfecting. On the first day, a young Broom cadet raised his hand. "Instructor Vasquez, why do you use steel? Why not plasma blades or energy weapons?" Elena smiled, the same smile she had given Soranthe on that first night in the observation deck. "Because plasma blades are tools," she said. "They compensate for your weaknesses. They make up for your lack of skill. But steel is a teacher. It does not forgive mistakes. It does not make you faster or stronger than you really are. It forces you to be better, or it lets you die." She drew her sword, the same blade that had traveled across 300 years and countless light years to reach this moment. It gleamed in the training hall's lights, ancient and beautiful and deadly. "The galaxy is full of enemies who think technology makes them invincible," she said. "Your job is to prove them wrong. Your job is to learn what my people learned through 10,000 years of blood and pain, that the warrior matters more than